welcome to Crossing Cultures with Cristina Luna. I'm not in the Poconos or in the United States. Today, I am crossing cultures in the other side of the Atlantic in Barcelona, Spain. And I have my friend Michael that is in New York City, and he's introducing me to, I guess, a friend of him. He says he's in Paris, and I said, well, let's do this with our viewers. So, Michael, hello, how are you?
Hi, Christina. Cold. It's cold in New York.
I know that you just came from Paris. What were you doing there?
The couture shows, the Paris
Ah,
couture shows.
Michael, I know that you do fashion shows, you're kinds of interesting people. He insisted in your podcast, you need to have Vincent. And I was, okay, here is Vincent. Vincent is in Paris. I'm in Barcelona. And Michael's in New York. This is Crossing Cultures, all a complete crossing cultures. So tell us, Michael, introduce us to Vincent.
Vincent, I've known since the late 70s. He was a creative director where I was so lucky to have been fortunate enough to have been hired from him. He was probably the best dressed, most creative, artistic, political person in New York. And he ended up moving to Paris 20 something years ago. And we've stayed in touch. And now he is in the film business doing wonderful films. He has a different point of view on how things look from living abroad. He has a passionate heart still about what's going on in our country. And he is an artist, not only on canvas, but on film now.
Vincent, welcome. Thank you for
Oh,
being with
thank you.
us.
Thank you for that illustrious introduction.
He's a good friend. What did you do for him? He's a really good friend, Michael. You can see that.
He hired me when I needed to be hired as a young boy, and he took a chance on me,
What did he
and
hire
I
you
never
for?
forgot about it. You know,
Well, his hair stylist talents,
He's a great
and
hairstylist.
personality, honey.
well, personality. I mean, we clicked
Personality.
immediately. It was just like he walked in and I said, "You're booked."
That's what happens. When you meet Michael, you book him. That's
You
it.
just book them. Don't ask any questions.
But Vincent was so brave back in the 80s to step up, speak up, and act up. And ACT UP was a very political platform for gay people during the time of the 80s when so many men were dying of AIDS. And he went out there and put his life on the line and protested. And it's amazing what he's done. Look at people in my life, and I think Vincent's probably one of the bravest people I know, and how he's lived his life and never let it be run by money, but run by love of work and life and passion. And but a talent beyond talent, really talented. And when you see his work in Paris, and he has an art gallery in the Marais, you'll have to look. I think, Vincent, you have a website, don't you?
It's best to go on the gallery that represents me, and when you click on my name, you'll like see the last 8 or 9 shows that I've had there. So that
I will put it in the description. Okay. Now, introduce yourself, Vincent. Would you define yourself?
it's basically as a queer artist and activist who is, especially since started, making films and experimental videos and things like that early on. And I had to, somebody asked me a question, oh, you're not painting anymore. And I said, I've always considered myself a storyteller. And for me, all of us, like a number of my, you know, colleagues and friends, especially from the activist community of ACT UP, kind of 25 years into ACT UP and AIDS activism, we felt collectively, coincidentally, um, that we had to tell the story. For me, it's all personal. Because very early on, and I probably knew that I was in trouble, I never perceived art as decoration.
Right.
I always perceived it as an instrument that, is a visual, it's a visual language that fuses storytelling, right, with urgency and activism, with intimacy.
That's very intuitive.
It,
Early on, you
yeah, yeah.
connected art with a way of storytelling.
Yeah, I was just like not quite sure how or why. I grew up in a very standard middle class family, very permissive. Since the first time I went to New York was when I was 13 by myself with a friend from New Jersey. Yeah, not from New York. It was about a 30-minute bus ride. And my mother wasn't home. She was at a local park with my sister doing pony rides. And those days, the only way to get a hold of her was to have her paged at the park. So I had her page and she, what's wrong? What's happening? I said, Mom, is it okay if I go to New York with James, like now? Because, it doesn't get gayer than this. I said, Vanessa Redgrave film, The Loves of Isadora, is at the Sutton movie theater. Like, I didn't even know the Sutton movie theater, right? It was the ad and the thing. But we've got to see it now. So she goes, okay, be careful.
Wonderful. So, how did this first experience that you remember so well impact you?
It impacted me in the sense that I knew exactly where I had to end up, which was in New York City. Um, kind of and that was kind of the beginning of going there, like until I decided to go to art school there. And it's interesting because I would go to the movies constantly, but for some reason then the idea of film school wasn't kind of talked about, in my high school. It was all art, art school. You would go, if you were an artist, you were going to go to art school. So I went, and luckily enough, it was a Parsons School of Design, which was very progressive and let me do painting, let me take photography and do my photography assignments in video, and I'd go on the roof and with friends and we'd make these nutty videos, and everything. And then, and so all along, being, especially during even high school, because 68, being very political. I made my mom drive me to hear Jane Fonda speak at Fairleigh Dickinson University, which was in near where we lived. And yeah, I mean, I had a little demonstration against the church because they wanted to get rid of this kind of progressive priest. So, and it's like today, when I, kind of flash forward to, you know, well, I really, with regards to storytelling, one of the first big leaps into it was making my film after Louis, because it was a time where men of a certain age that grew out of that political arena, like myself, there was a schism. There seemed to be a schism between my generation and the younger generation. And it's interesting because the film is very autobiographical with a lot of artistic license taken in terms of the story, my own personal story, but it's there. But I was always, I didn't have that kind of attitude that a lot of my older friends like myself had about these kids know nothing. But it was just like I always came from, how you inspire somebody
Yeah.
through a story. So
How old were you?
I would sit around. This is kind of, let's see, 2000, year 2000, and and it was it became my storytelling became, sometimes I think, oh God, I'm going to sound like this guy's father or grandfather, oh my God. And I was always kind of conscious of that it would be a kind of very, I don't know, a bit of like provocation on my part. I like to provoke.
Wait, tell me about the movie because I'm curious. First
Mhm.
movie, was you said that it has some autobiographic
The
reflection in it?
first the first feature I made after Louis.
Af- But after Louis, it means that you intended to make it autobiographical or it just happened to develop in that.
It was very interesting how it developed into that, because I had written the script by myself. It was inspired by a short novella a friend of mine, William Wilson, wrote, and about the novel, the novella starts out, the first line is, here's how I think I got the AIDS virus, and then he flashes back, and we'd had conversations about making a movie, not necessarily that movie, but a movie. And he was from Yale and a wonderful character, and I always felt so illiterate when I'd be talking to him. So I wrote this film, pulling a very provocative, long 180-page script. It was more like an opera than anything else. Started to seriously want to figure out how to make a movie, how to make a feature. I met this young producer through my friend Eugene Hernandez, who was one of the founders of IndieWire, who is now the director of Sundance. What happened was I met this producer, and he never did a feature film before. So I said, all right, then his friend Lauren came on. And so there were three of us who never did a feature film before, who was going to do a feature film before. I had an 180-page unfinanceable script. It was insane. I had people embellished with gold floating on the Hudson River. I mean, it was crazy. It's an opera. So I saved that script. So he said, I'd like you to meet a friend of mine, and he's a performance artist and he's young, but I think that you might, enjoy meeting him and considering him to possibly maybe rewrite the film. So I did, and we did. So the film how the film grew, the subject grew into this schism between generations, was that he was young and he didn't know very much about ACT UP or any of the art world and from in that time, and stuff. So the script became autobiographical. It became older guy, younger guy, you know, and I had to make it sexy. The character, the older guy of Sam, who's very not bitter, but he can't move on from the activist days. And he meets a kid at a bar and takes him home. And the kid wakes up the next day and finds $500 wrapped in his sneaker. And he said, "What is this?" And the guy, says to him, "Well, I figured 500 for an overnight." He thought so, little of himself that he could actually attract a young man that you just had to pay for it. And the film became about these two people discovering that neither generation was who they thought that generation was.
What did you learn from that movie, and how did it
Uh,
impact the other people that viewed it?
yeah, we had incredible run in so many festivals, big ones, small ones. New York we had a 10-day run at a movie theater in New York. And I would always kind of introduce the film with a little bit of um, politics and, that was little bit of a provocative
Tell us about your
introduction.
political views. How do you project those in your art, or the other way around?
It's kind of, it works both ways. After Louis is overtly political. Conversations that are had in the film are strong, but it had to be beautiful and it had to inspire and it had to be funny like life is, and sad and angry, and it was all of those things. I had an incredible cast from New York. I had Alan Cumming was my lead character. Sarita Shidori played his character's best friend. Justin Vivian Bond, who I've known for years and is just such a powerful force in the queer community and the trans community. It's just extraordinary. And Wilson Cruz, and just an amazing kind of New York cast. So what came out of all that is kind of continuity of vision. The same instincts that drove me youth,
What were those instincts that?
that drove just the it's like I believe that that moment where I thought that I had to go to New York that day to see that film was instinctive, because if I hadn't done that, I don't know that I'd even be sitting here today.
Mm.
It was really a very, like, just immediate, like, I was reading the Village Voice and saw an ad for it, and I wasn't doing anything. It was like in the morning,
Yeah.
and I don't know, it just went.
And what made you become a political activist?
Well, in 1968, the war. Vietnam War
Did you go to the
and
war?
demonstrations. Yeah.
You didn't have to be.
No,
So
no, I was 13 and
oh,
60.
no,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Thank
was,
God that
yeah,
they
yeah,
don't do that.
yeah. They don't do it yet. Yeah. Jane Fonda was like a hero. Eugene McCarthy was like a poet. He considered himself a poet. So I said, this is like wild. For the Village Voice, WBAI at midnight, underneath the sheets in bed, listening to to the radio and stuff like that. So yeah, so I mean, that's all. I had it's instinctive. You just don't ask, you don't ask any questions, and you sometimes have to ask for permission. And and then, what started to happen is then it's those instincts that create that the work is created out of, whether it's a painting, a piece of graphic design, a political poster, it was all like all of that fueled take the activist area,
What
these,
do you think is happening nowadays? Because it feels that all that energy to fight, to be active for what one belief that was
yeah,
different
yeah.
doesn't exist so much anymore. Does
No,
it?
what's sad, what's very sad is I used to say something back, when someone would ask that question, I would say, if we did today what we did on the streets in Act Up, which is, you know, political theater, it was sometimes because me and some of my cohorts were very theatrical and we would have, posters cut out in the shape of flames, things like that. We'd be shot,
Do you think
you
that
know?
what's going on will make people get out to the streets eventually and demonstrate?
Yeah, well, they have in the States a lot. I mean, they're out there,
But
you
enough
know?
to make a change?
I think so. I mean, I think that one of the things that I've never stopped believing in is our power, the one voice. So if you take one voice and multiply it by tens and thousands of voices, which seems to be happening right now in the States.
What do we need for these young people, young generations to get moving, to wake up?
Um,
What is missing?
I think inspiration, and which leads me to, I think the first people that have to wake up are our congressmen and women. Like I had McGovern and, Eugene McCarthy and Jane Fonda and this and that and everything. And it was a time, there was no social media, there was nothing, we couldn't have this conversation like this then. It didn't exist. And I think that we get this kind of false idea that you put up something on an Instagram and that's political activism. And I'm not saying everybody has to go scream on the streets, So I think it's inspiration. This young friend of mine in Paris stopped and said, "How do you continue to hope?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I don't know. Look at the world we're living in. How can anyone have any hope for anything?" And it was sad. And I kind of saw, it's just like, well, I said, well, I had, to this day when I'm in Manhattan, I go see my mentor, this painter who hired me while I was still in school and had a lot to do with shaping who I am, as an artist and as a political person and just as a human being who wants to like have fun also along the way. So yeah, it's because clarity, is so like important. It can't be all muddled and and stuff. It has to be really clarity. I never could get arrested because I was one of the organizers, so I had to
Uh-huh.
stay out of jail.
You're, yeah, yeah.
And compromising is a word that comes to mind. It's like when I think about someone once said, who said, a painter friend of mine, who said the work doesn't merely document, a moment. It actually shapes the moment.
Wow. I love that. So tell
No.
us about Paris. What made you move? New York seemed the place that where you grew, where you get
Yeah.
shaped, and then you moved to Paris like how long?
Yeah.
20 years ago?
Yeah. Well, for me, it was very practical.
Why?
Paris was odd because I'm not a Frenchophile at all. My husband Richard is more, one day I turned to him, I said, I don't think I ever committed to being here, you know, 15 years later, 20 years later,
So you
I
moved
mean,
together to Paris?
yeah, 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 yeah.
What was the reason?
We had this great place in New York, 2 floors. Top floor was my studio. We lived across from Film Forum, and and it was very expensive, you know. And I had to, I was doing a lot of advertising and design work, oh, I stopped working for someone in like 80 89 or 90. And then we started with a group of people, weekly lesbian and gay news magazine called QW. And that was kind of great. Got to go to the MTV inaugural ball when Clinton got elected. And it was like really cool, and all that kind of stuff. But I realized I had to work. I had to make so much money to pay for the shift that we were living in. And I really wanted to get After Louis made. And one of the only ways to get that made is to not have that kind of overhead and have to work, 50 hours a week in the studio. And because you need to work 50 hours a week on the film, getting the film made. So it's like I didn't have 100 hours. And my partner was, kind of at the end of what he was doing and didn't want to do it anymore. He just walked by. Push came to shove. We had a number of some very close friends of ours had moved to Paris. One couple we would visit, go every year around either Thanksgiving or Christmas time and stuff and go. And these other people, so we kind of had these friends, in Paris, some French, some, Americans. And then it was the usual paperwork, but not difficult to make it happen.
And it did
And
happen.
yeah, je ne parle pas bien anyway.
Moi
Je-
non plus. I don't either.
un peu,
In
un peu.
progress. It's always in
It's
progress.
oh, that's what I say. I'm still learning. It's in progress. Give me some time.
So how did Paris impact you as personally and professionally and
That's
artistically?
yeah. It's really it gave me. It sounds like really not very, fancy, but it gave me kind of financial freedom.
How did you make a living? You said you
Well,
had
when
to.
I first got here, I worked for this kind of agency that would be were hired to kind of cite trends. And her clients were a lot of the big fragrance clients and cosmetic clients and stuff like that. And at the time, the whole trend in making presentations was with videos. So I
Mhm.
would make do all these videos and stuff like that. And I got the film made. This film that I'm working on now has a kind of crazy this
I
way
wanna I
history.
wanna talk about that in a minute, just
Yeah,
towards the end of the
yeah.
this talk. But tell me, how did you first adjust to Paris? Are the view of Americans then and now?
I think right now they have the same views of Americans as we have as Americans at this point. But yeah, it's interesting. After a few years, I was fine. After a few years, I had a moment of like, what the hell did I do? Get me out of here. Everything I need is in New York, my history that I draw upon and the stories and all that kind of stuff. What's going to happen? And then it kind of settled back down. And, with After Louis, I was, in New York more, more than I was here because I had to be there working on, we were raising the money.
Where is life more easier or more interesting for you now? For you and Richard, in New York or in Paris?
For me, New York is way more interesting. Yeah.
Well, that first time that you took the bus, that
Yeah.
stayed with you forever, I guess.
For,
What has Paris given you?
It's beautiful. It's funny, it's very practical. It just allows me to pursue the work that I want to make a photographer that have worked with a lot and know for years when he first started out. We did a beautiful book together and things like that that I like. There's a certain security in knowing that my rent isn't $7,000 and I'm
I
living in a
imagine.
really nice place.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if it was that in Paris too.
Yeah,
Wow, incredible, incredible. Yeah, it's
yeah,
crazy. That has to change. Anyway,
yeah.
tell us about your next project. It's very inspiring. I read, your proposal, and
Mm,
it's beautiful. It feels like kind of sensitive that it touches the souls of the people and of the country of the United States, the rural areas, not where it's just for me when I read it, the script or not the script, the proposal, it feels
yeah.
like it's a personal discovery through going rural America.
Ultimately, what we're all looking for is the truths about things, the truths about ourselves, just the broken promises of the American dream, the lies, but on a very personal level. Seeing those kinds of things. The hitchhiker, who I feel is a character that she comes in the car, she lands. It's almost a monologue.
I think it has to be you have to summarize it. Give us a little bit of
Yeah.
for our listeners.
Gosh, I should just read you the short summary I wrote.
Okay, I'll read it. I'll read it. I have it.
Suburban is
Modern
short.
folk tales spanning the American landscape, two strangers haunted by their past travel through the bruised heart of America, learning that the hardest thing to outrun is a version of themselves they were taught to hide. The summer
That's
is a
it.
poem by itself. You are a poet.
Yeah,
Next
yeah.
thing. So this is so beautiful. I can see this happening. When is this going to happen?
Well, we don't have the money yet, so we're very early stages. We're
So
trying
guys,
to
if anybody has a lot of money and
yeah,
wants to, or a little bit, or whatever,
they can make,
contact Vincent.
we have a fiscal sponsorship with the Film Forum where you can don't make a donation and get a tax deduction for whatever. So we've raised a good amount of money that way.
And lastly, what inspired you to create, to develop this new movie, Lambertville?
Casper, there's two main characters, Danny and Casper. Casper is in so many ways. I have a co-writer based on his experiences with confronting mortality and making a very big decision about it. And for me, I still say to myself once, I remember hearing myself when I was probably 11 saying that I wanted to be on the cover of Interview magazine. He moves to New York from upstate, with seven brothers, no mother, just a father, and with wanting to be inspired by Robert Frank, the social commentary photography and kind of mapping of America at a particular time and place. And he ends up not not too good of shape.
That you feel it is personal to you.
The notion that you're free to act upon your dreams.
That's something that they don't raise us with, and that society is not
Yeah,
doesn't permit it. I'm very kind of amazed and impressed that you were brave enough all your life since that day that you went to New York City to embrace this. So lastly, what would you say to all these people? You can say something to the world right now, to these young people.
yeah. Be stubborn, take no for an answer, do the work.
What I
Yeah.
say, the work doesn't happen by itself, by
No,
sitting and doing nothing, right?
the power you have is in the work that you do. So if you don't do the work, you don't have the power.
Wow. We're going to leave it in that because that's a very powerful end. Thank you for telling us all about your journey, your story, your dreams, how you went from one thing to the other, how you told stories through art and through movies, and you were brave enough to listen to yourself and develop it. And I think that's very therapeutical too. Yes.
Primarily, though, I want to say I'm not heroic. There are no, I don't think somebody I could be heroic for somebody, but I don't consider myself heroic.
I think that being alive nowadays is being heroic enough.
Possibly.
Possibly. Crossing Cultures with Cristina Luna, and today with Michael that came and left but introduced us, and Vincent Gagliostro. Thank you very much, and
It was a
good luck.
pleasure. Pleasure. Thank you.